Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Handmade Chelsea Online, a live session. We're joined by Jane Macintosh, who is a jeweller, and she's kindly letting us in for a sneak preview, and we'll be discussing traditional tools and modern jewellery. And this is a question and answer, so you'll see me popping in for some questions. And don't forget, this is an interactive session. So do, have a look on our chat and our question and answer, and do ask any questions that you have for Jane, and then throughout the talk I will pop in and ask these questions to her. So over to you, Jane. Really nice to have you aboard this morning.
Hello everybody. I have been making jewellery for a long time, but it is a second career for me. And I started out as a translator, and perhaps making jewellery is really translating ideas into wearable sculpture, which is how I sometimes think of jewellery. And I'm lucky enough to have a workshop at the back of my garden in London. And there I make simple looking pieces of jewellery, but which do require an awful lot of care because every defect is all too apparent when you have very clean shapes and lines. So I combine silver with 18-karat gold because I love the warmth of the gold together with the purity of the silver, and which I sometimes oxidize, which makes it look more dramatic. I'm going to show you here a pendant with oxidized silver and quite a beautiful citrine in it. And so the black is oxidized silver and the citrine is set in 18-karat gold. And here, just to show you the different kinds, this is a pair of ear clips, which have a silver, gold on one side and silver on the other. And I make this by soldering a sheet of gold side by side with a sheet of silver, and then finish it so that the seam is invisible. And sometimes here is a brooch. I don't know if you can see that I have cut out the shape in the middle and fitted the gold in. So the gold goes all the way through, and here is the back of it, where you can see, I hope, the gold coming all the way through. So I love the metal. I also love beautiful stones. And I often source these in Germany, where I find a wonderful range of semi-precious materials. I'm showing you all these pieces just so you get an idea of my work. These stones are chalcedony, these blue ones, and they're little sapphires at the bottom, and again, the gold with the silver. The traditional tools. Well, I first became aware of how jewellers' tools have hardly changed in millennia when I visited Egypt years ago. And there in the Valley of the Kings, I saw these tools illustrated on the walls of one of the tombs and realized that I'm still using these same tools today. Here, one of the tools that was illustrated on the wall is my drill. It's called a bow drill, and it has a wooden bar running across with a big hole drilled in, shaft goes through. It has a drill at the bottom and a string which goes through the metal shaft at the top. And you spin it round like that, and then you work it up and down. Whoops, it's not working up and down now. Like that. It's very gentle, and it pierces, makes a hole in the metal. And a pair of dividers. I mean, lots of people have dividers. And these things were just beautifully illustrated on the Egyptian tomb. And, the perception of traditional tools was reinforced when I went to the Museum of London a couple of years ago, and I saw the Cheapside hoard of jewellery, which had been discovered in the city of London about 100 years ago. And that dates back to the English Civil War in the 17th century. And there at the exhibition, they did a mock-up of a 16th century jeweller's workshop, which they'd taken from an engraving of that period. And it did look awfully like my workshop. And I'm just going to show you a few of the tools that were in that workshop and which are also in my workshop. So here, for example, this is my saw frame, my saw, and I don't know if you can see, this very thin saw blade runs through. And this is what we use for cutting precious metals. And things like, for example, this is called a sparrow hawk, and it's a little anvil, round at one side and flat on the other. And this is, we hammer metal round to get the shape, for shapes. And of course, lots of different hammers and so on. And again, for shaping metal, this is called a swage block. And it has all different profiles, and you put your flat metal in and hammer it down into the curve to get the right curve that you want. And I have here some lovely, I think, lovely scales. They're incredibly accurate. And I have weights for them, which go from several grams right down to tiny fractions of a gram, micrograms. And so I find those invaluable. Of course, you can get digital scales now, but I like those ones. And oh, did I show you? This is charcoal for soldering on. So again, goodness knows, I mean, people have been using charcoal forever. And so you put your, whatever you're soldering on it and heat it, and the charcoal heats up and spreads the heat over the metal that you're soldering. And so you see, all these things, there's nothing new about them, but it's what probably most of us are using to this day. And of course, the trade has all the modern technology now, and computer-generated things and lasers and so on. And of course, I have modern things like gas to provide heat for soldering, and I've got an electric polishing machine, and beautiful rolling mills for rolling my metal down thinner. But I haven't got much else that wouldn't have been available to the ancient Egyptians. So I think that's probably enough for me by way of an introduction. If you have your questions, please ask them.
So Jane, you've shown us a range of your tools there. How much of an influence do they have for you arriving at a design? Do you look at your tools first, or do you look at your materials and look how your tools can help to shape an idea forming in your head?
Well, I suppose in a way, the fact that I don't have all these very modern tools, there must be limitations to a certain extent. And I think of all the possibilities that computers could provide. But my mind doesn't really work that way. And I'm used to working with the tools that I've got. And these tools have enabled absolutely fabulous jewellery to be made for millennia. And so, I might go out and buy a new tool for a particular job, but nothing high tech. But I think that my mind works within the limits of the tools that I've got. And of course, my materials, it's gold and silver and, and stones, and all of these are an influence on my designs.
So I can see you've got some pieces of work certainly behind you, and I was really captivated actually by some of your earrings that you showed a little earlier. So with the stones in mind, so does the idea for settings that you do they kind of influence the overall look, or do the stones influence the setting? How important does the stone play in your collections?
Well, if I'm making a piece with a lovely stone, it's a stone which influences the design, there's no question of it. Or dictates the design, I'd say. But if I'm making something where it's the shape of the overall piece which is the most important thing, then I'm influenced by other things, really. The shapes and patterns of what I see around me, in which case then I will choose stones which complement the design rather than the other way around. And so it works both ways, but certainly it's the big stones that influence the design.
So Jane, do you have a favourite tool and why?
God. I mean, I use so many tools, and I couldn't actually manage with just one, but of particular favourites, I think the bow drill that I showed you earlier. I love its simplicity, and I love it's terribly effective, and it's silent. which I suppose the alternative to this would be an electric drill. And electric drills are cumbersome and noisy and harder to place accurately. And this is, you can put it exactly where you want it, and you haven't got any electricity or vibration to move it slightly. And I just find it I find it a very beautiful object. But I couldn't really live with that.
So we can see your designs behind, but what part of the design and making process do you find the most satisfying?
Well, I get quite excited when I decide on a design, and I get really all enthused about starting it. But really the most satisfying part for me, I think, probably, is having worked out how I'll make it. It's actually getting started and getting out my, measuring and so on, getting out my saw frame and cutting the metal and piecing it all together. I get a real buzz from that. And all of that's before the problems start showing themselves, which they often do, because every piece I make is a new design. And so quite often there are things that I haven't quite thought through carefully enough. And so then problem solving, it's a headache, but on the other hand, it's a challenge that I love. But once it's all come together, seeing the finished piece actually does make me really happy.
I think in some ways, I mean, when is a piece ever finished? It can, it's like a piece of string, how long can it go? Do you ever feel that a piece is finished in your eyes?
Yes, I do, in fact. And I do have a problem. I have thought sometimes that I would like to do a much more rough and ready sort of thing, but I end up finishing and finishing and finishing. And there comes a point when you think, enough, because the lines of what I make, it's very clean, the line. And once you've got all the flaws out of the way and got a good finish on it, yes, it is finished. And I don't set the stones myself. I send that off to somebody else. But in times gone by, stone setting was an apprenticeship all of its own. It had quite separate from the way I trained, which was in diamond mounting, which means making all the settings. So once I've sent the stones off to be set and then done the final polish, it is finished.
So we saw earlier there that you had a beautiful brooch that you showed us. Now I could see that you had a solid piece, of gold. So one of the questions I'd really like to ask is: some jewelers do use gold plating, or they fuse a thin layer of gold onto the surface of the silver to create a similar effect. Why do you use solid gold rather than one of the kind of, I suppose, an easier technique?
Well, I like using solid gold. I think because I feel that's a real McCoy. It's in a way, it's slightly like the writing going all the way through Seaside Rock. It's absolutely, it is what it says it is. I don't really like gold plating because it's such a thin layer, and it doesn't take an awful lot for it to wear off. And the other alternative is fusing gold onto silver, which is an old Korean technique, and it's called kumbo. And it's thicker than plating, but it's still only a surface treatment. And I don't know, for me, jewellery ought to be the genuine article and last a lifetime. And so that's why I prefer to use it. I also very much like the colour of 18-karat gold, which is a bit softer than pure 24-karat gold, which is what they use for gold plating and for kumbo. So yes, I shall continue to use solid gold.
Can we just have another look at the brooch, just because we've just discussed it? Can we have a look just to see and just to remind everyone that you do indeed have.
there it is. That's the front, and at the back, I'll open it so you can, pin's not in the way. In fact, I used slightly thinner gold than the silver for this one because I wanted a more solid silver, and I didn't need quite such a hefty piece of gold. But you see, I cut out the shape, and then I filed it exactly so that it fits in perfectly. So that I then just solder it into place.
Well, we're just coming to the end, Jane, but I'm still really interested in some of the pieces that you've got behind. So can we actually find some of those on Handmade Chelsea online? And we can find a bit more, because I can see you've got some beautiful necklaces, and then you've got some beautiful shaped pieces in silver there. And are those some beads? The one in that lovely lavender colour just behind. Are they beads or are they different stones? It'd be lovely just to have a little peek.
They're amethyst beads, these ones, and they've got little dark amethysts in between. And this is a silver and gold section, which just sits slightly off centre.
I've never seen amethyst like that before. Kind of these huge, even like transparent, but with that sheen. It's normally that rocky formation that I've seen. I think they're really beautiful. I won't ask you how you do that. That's obviously a trade secret on there, but it's a beautiful piece. It's kind of chunky but delicate because you've got the spacing in between, each piece. So it looks rather heavy, but not.
Well, I will confess that I don't actually cut the beads myself. These ones I did buy in Germany, which is where I seem to find all my most interesting stones. And then I make the metal part.
How amazing! I wouldn't think Germany was the first stop for stones.
It's extraordinary. Well, they have a big trade fair every year that quite a lot of jewellers from England go to because of the extraordinary range of people come from all over the world to sell their stones there. But the Germans they're very sort of broad-minded, you could say, in what they accept and like, and I find it a very exciting place to visit for stones.
It sounds like you can find, like, really, pardon the pun, kind of hidden gems, at places, such as that. Because I suppose it gives you so many different ideas, because you would be seeing stones, you would be seeing colours and different colours going together that I suppose can be quite influential, for designs.
You're absolutely right. I find it very inspiring. To see, as you say, to see the different things going together that one might not have been thought of, but you see them and think, wow, that's just very special. And so it's a great treat going to this particular trade fair. It's called In Orgenta, and it happens in Munich every February.
I'm only familiar here with the ones in the UK, so I've never thought of kind of more kind of Europe. So that's really interesting to know. And just I'd love to just finish on one final piece. Is there a particular favourite piece behind you that we haven't yet had a good look at? Is one of those kind of a little favourite of yours, or do you have a favourite piece to share?
Well, it's difficult to say, because when I buy stones, I think, oh, that's the best stone ever.
I feel I'm putting you on the spot. I think that's really. Oh, I was hoping you were going to choose.
I can't say this is a favourite one, but I do particularly love the stone in the middle of this one, which is fool's gold, and this is pyrite fool's gold, which is just embedded in slate, and so it's a perfectly natural formation. And so I look at that and I just think, what a lovely stone. and so I put it with cornelians and other slate beads. And so no, I'm not going to say it's my favourite piece, but I just find it a particularly interesting stone, that, and I just love making it.
That's really interesting. I wouldn't have thought kind of fool's gold, but it's lovely. It's so smooth, and then you've kind of got this kind of peak in the middle, and then you've got the lovely smooth stones in the lovely orange. So it's lovely warm with the darker, you know, contrast of fool's gold. That's lovely. I wouldn't have thought, you know, putting those two together, but it really does work. It looks lovely.
So thank you. Yes, good.
Well, Jane, we're now coming to the end. So I'd like to say, you know, to you, Jane, thank you so much for your time this morning. It's been lovely to get to know a little bit more, you know, about you, but also your work. It's such a beautiful range, and we're so, you know, pleased to have it here on, you know, Handmade Chelsea online. And thank you, everyone, you know, for joining us this morning. We haven't been able to get through all of the questions, but what we have done is I've popped, first of all, a link via our chat box, and that takes you straight to Jane's shop profile. But also we do run live chat. So Jane is live now via live chat, and you can go onto our interact.handmadebrick.co.uk, click live chat, and you can find Jane's room just on the left hand side. So click, so if you've got any burning questions, do go there straight after. And then if not, you can obviously pop in there over the next couple of days. And next time Jane pops on, she'll be able to answer your question. So once again, Jane, thank you so much for joining us this morning. And we do hope you've enjoyed your time with us.
Thank you all for being with me and for listening.